The sun was sinking toward the western mountains, but the desert still burned beneath Cain's horse. Heat shimmered above the cracked earth, turning distant rocks into ghostly shapes. For 2 days, the Apache warrior had been riding alone. Behind him lay the battlefield where humans and orcs had fought until neither side could claim victory. Cain had lost friends there. He had seen orc warriors fall beneath human arrows, and he had watched human soldiers disappear beneath the orcs' heavy blades. The war had taught him one thing: hatred could make enemies out of anyone. Now he only wanted to reach his mountain settlement before darkness. His horse suddenly slowed. Cain tightened the reins and looked ahead. A dry riverbed crossed the valley. Near its edge stood several broken trees, their branches stripped bare by the relentless heat. Something moved beneath one of them. Cain reached for his rifle. He dismounted slowly. Then he saw them. 3 orc warriors lay scattered across the sand. They were enormous compared with ordinary humans, with broad shoulders, green-gray skin, and battle scars covering their arms. Their weapons lay several feet away, apparently dropped when they became too weak to hold them. Cain immediately recognized their armor. They belonged to the same orc warband that had fought against his people weeks earlier. His hand tightened around his rifle. The easiest choice would have been to walk away. The desert would finish what the battle had started. Cain took 1 step backward. Then he heard a faint sound. Water. He looked at the orc nearest to him. She was a female warrior, badly wounded across her shoulder. Her lips were cracked, and her breathing was shallow. Beside her lay an older orc whose face was covered with dust. The third warrior was barely conscious. Cain looked at the canteen attached to his saddle. There was only one. And it was almost full. He had planned to use that water during the final stretch of his journey. Without it, he might not survive the night. The female orc suddenly opened her eyes. She saw the rifle. Her hand moved toward a broken sword. Cain raised the rifle. For several seconds, neither moved. Then the orc's strength disappeared. Her hand fell into the sand. Cain lowered his weapon. He remembered something his father had once told him: a warrior proves his strength not by destroying the helpless, but by deciding what to do when nobody can stop him. Cain slowly removed the canteen from his saddle. The orc stared at it. "You'll need this," Cain said. She did not understand. Cain opened the cap and held the canteen toward her. The orc hesitated. Then she drank. Only a few mouthfuls. She stopped and passed it to the older warrior beside her. Cain watched silently as the water moved from one desperate hand to another. When the canteen returned, there was less than half left. The female orc looked at Cain with confusion. "Why?" she whispered. Cain glanced toward the battlefield far behind him. "You're my enemies," he said. "But you're still dying of thirst." The orc studied him as though he had spoken a language she had never heard. Cain knelt beside them and examined their wounds. The female warrior had a deep cut across her shoulder. The older orc had several burns from an explosion during the battle. Cain tore strips from an old cloth and helped bind their wounds. He knew he was taking a risk. If they recovered, they could attack him. If other orcs arrived, they might kill him. Yet he continued. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, the female orc finally introduced herself. "Raska." Cain nodded. "Cain." Raska looked at the remaining water. "You have little left." "I know. You may die without it." Cain closed the canteen and placed it beside her. "Then drink." Raska stared at him. For the first time in years, she looked at a human without seeing an enemy. Before Cain mounted his horse, he noticed something unusual in the distance. Fresh tracks crossed the northern ridge. Not human. Not orc. Dozens of them. Cain's expression changed. He turned toward Raska. "There is something coming." Raska followed his gaze. Her face became pale. She knew those tracks. The Black Iron Army, she whispered. Cain frowned. What is that? Raska looked toward the darkening horizon. The reason our war is about to become meaningless. Cain realized that the 3 wounded orcs were not simply survivors of an old battle. They were the first warning. And the greatest danger was already coming. Night settled over the mountain valley, bringing a cold wind that swept through the pine trees. Cain had barely reached his settlement when he noticed something strange. No campfires burned outside the wooden homes. The villagers were awake. They stood in small groups near the fences, whispering nervously and looking toward the northern ridge. Cain dismounted. What happened? He asked. An older hunter named Tomas hurried toward him. Tracks, Tomas said. Orc tracks. Cain looked toward the mountains. How many? Too many. Cain immediately understood. Raska and the other wounded orcs had survived. But he had not expected them to follow him. The settlement quickly became tense. Men grabbed rifles and bows. Women pulled children inside their homes. Everyone remembered the battles between humans and orcs. Cain raised a hand. Wait. Tomas stared at him. Wait for what? They're coming here. They may not be coming to attack. Tomas looked at him as if he had lost his mind. You gave orcs water. Cain said nothing. The villagers began murmuring. Before anyone could argue further, a deep voice echoed from the darkness. Cain. Every weapon lifted. Figures emerged between the trees. Orcs. At least 20 of them. Their weapons were visible, but none were raised. At the front walked Raska. Her shoulder was wrapped in the cloth Cain had used earlier. Beside her were the 2 warriors he had rescued. They were still weak, but they were alive. Tomas stepped forward. Stay back. Raska stopped. She looked at Cain. Then she slowly removed the sword from her belt and placed it on the ground. One by one, the other orcs followed. Cain lowered his rifle. What do you want? He asked. Raska reached into her clothing and pulled something out. Cain recognized it immediately. His canteen. She walked forward and held it toward him. You gave this to us, she said. Cain took it. It was only water. Raska shook her head. No. It was more than that. She looked at the human villagers surrounding them. My people have spent generations believing humans were monsters. Your people were taught the same about us. She pointed toward the mountains. But something worse has come. Tomas frowned. What did you mean by Black Iron Army? Raska's expression hardened. They came from the north 3 months ago. At first, we thought they were traitors. Then they attacked one of our villages. She described soldiers wearing black metal armor, carrying strange weapons capable of destroying stone walls. They killed warriors, burned homes, and took our food. Cain listened carefully. Why didn't you fight them? We did. Raska looked toward her wounded warriors. We lost. Silence spread through the settlement. Raska continued. Then they began moving south. Cain's eyes narrowed. How far? Raska looked directly at him. 3 days. The villagers began panicking. Tomas shook his head. You expect us to believe orcs? Raska turned toward him. You don't have to trust me. She pointed toward the northern mountains. Just watch. Everyone looked. At first, there was nothing. Then a faint orange glow appeared beyond the ridge. A second glow followed. Then another. Cain's stomach tightened. Fires. Hundreds of them. The Black Iron Army was moving. Raska stepped closer to Cain. They are not coming for the orcs alone. Cain looked at the distant fires. What do they want? Raska answered quietly. The valley. She explained that the valley contained the largest remaining water source for miles. Whoever controlled it could control every settlement in the region. The old war between humans and orcs had made both sides weak. The Black Iron Army had been waiting for that. Cain finally understood. Their enemies had not been fighting each other by accident. Someone had benefited from their hatred. Someone had been watching. Cain looked at the humans behind him. Then at the orc warriors. For generations, their people had believed peace was impossible. But now both faced the same threat. Cain walked to the center of the settlement. He placed his rifle against the fence. Then he looked at Raska. If your people are willing to stand with us. Raska finished his sentence. Then we will fight beside you. The villagers stared in disbelief. Cain extended his hand. After a moment, Raska accepted it. Human and orc hands met beneath the cold mountain moon. Neither knew how long the alliance would last. Neither knew how many would survive. But one thing had changed forever. The water Cain had given to 3 dying enemies had become the first bridge between 2 peoples who had spent generations trying to destroy each other. By sunrise, the valley no longer looked the same. For generations, humans and orcs had watched each other from opposite sides of the mountains. Their children had grown up hearing stories about the cruelty of the other race. Yet that morning, something impossible was happening. Human hunters and orc warriors stood together around the same fire. Nobody trusted the other side completely. But everyone understood that the Black Iron Army was coming. Cain stood over a rough wooden table covered with stones and pieces of cloth. The stones represented the mountains surrounding the settlement. A blue strip of cloth represented the river. Raska stood opposite him. How many soldiers? Cain asked. More than 500, she answered. Several villagers exchanged frightened looks. Tomas frowned. We have barely 60 fighters. Raska nodded. My warriors are fewer than 100. Cain studied the map. If we fight them in the open, we lose. An orc warrior named Durgan slammed his fist onto the table. Then we attack before they arrive. Cain shook his head. They expect that. Durgan growled. They are stronger than us. Waiting gives them more time. Cain pointed toward the mountains. That's why we don't fight where they're strongest. Everyone became silent. He explained that the Black Iron Army would have to pass through Red Canyon before reaching the settlement. The canyon was narrow, surrounded by steep cliffs. If we control the canyon, Cain said, their numbers won't matter as much. Raska looked at the map. You want to turn the mountain into a weapon. Exactly. The plan was dangerous. The humans would hide along the cliffs with bows and rifles. The orc warriors would wait inside the canyon. When the Black Iron Army entered, the humans would attack from above while the orcs blocked the path behind them. But there was one problem. The 2 sides had never fought together. They had different signals, different battle strategies, and completely different ideas about combat. Cain spent the morning teaching the orcs the hand signals used by his hunters. Raska taught the humans how orc warriors communicated during battle. At first, the training was chaotic. An orc warrior misunderstood a signal and charged too early. A human hunter accidentally fired an arrow near an orc's foot. Arguments erupted. But Cain refused to let them give up. Again and again, they practiced. By afternoon, something unexpected happened. They began laughing. An orc warrior named Durgan tried to copy the humans' quiet movements and immediately tripped over a rock. Even Raska laughed. Cain smiled. For the first time, he saw the possibility of something greater than an alliance. They could become a team. That evening, Cain and Raska climbed a ridge overlooking the valley. Smoke appeared on the northern horizon. The Black Iron Army was closer. Raska folded her arms. My people will follow me into the canyon. Cain looked at her. And if they don't? They will. She paused. You saved my life when you could have walked away. Cain looked toward the stars. I didn't save you because you were an orc. Raska studied him. Then why? Because you were thirsty. She smiled faintly. That may be the strangest answer I've ever heard. Cain laughed. Then the mood changed. Raska pointed toward the distant smoke. There is something you need to know. Cain turned. The Black Iron Army has a commander called Varek. Who is he? A human. Cain's expression hardened. Raska continued. He knows our weaknesses. He has studied both humans and orcs for years. Cain realized the danger. If Varek truly understood both peoples, the canyon might not be enough. Still, they had no choice. The following morning, everyone moved into position. Humans climbed the cliffs. Orcs disappeared into the shadows of the canyon. Cain stood at the highest point, watching the northern road. Hours passed. Then he heard it. Marching. Hundreds of boots striking the earth. The Black Iron Army appeared on the horizon. Black armor. Black banners. Rows of soldiers moving with frightening discipline. Cain raised his hand. Nobody moved. The army entered the canyon. Raska waited. The final soldiers crossed the entrance. Cain lowered his hand. The first arrows flew. Chaos erupted. The orcs charged from the canyon walls while humans attacked from above. The Black Iron soldiers struggled to respond. For several minutes, the plan worked perfectly. Then a horn sounded. The enemy soldiers suddenly stopped retreating. Cain's eyes widened. They knew. Raska looked toward the canyon entrance. Black-armored soldiers were climbing the cliffs. The enemy had prepared for the ambush. And at the center of the canyon stood a tall man wearing black armor. Varek. He looked toward Cain. Then he smiled. The battle had only just begun. The first explosion shook Red Canyon like an earthquake. Cain was thrown against the rocky ground as stones rained from above. For a moment, the entire battlefield disappeared behind dust and smoke. He pushed himself upright. Raska. A deep roar answered from below. Cain. He spotted her through the dust. She was standing beside 3 orc warriors, trying to pull a wounded human soldier away from the collapsing canyon wall. Get everyone back. Cain shouted. Raska looked upward. More rocks were breaking loose. The Black Iron Army had discovered the weakness in the canyon walls and was using explosive charges to turn the humans' own battlefield into a trap. Fall back. Raska shouted to the orcs. But the enemy had already closed both exits. Black-armored soldiers poured into the canyon. Their shields locked together. Their strange weapons fired bursts of flame and smoke. Human fighters scattered. Orc warriors charged anyway. Durgan slammed into the enemy line with enough force to knock 2 soldiers backward. Raska followed, swinging her massive axe. For a moment, the orcs pushed the Black Iron soldiers back. Then another explosion erupted. The canyon wall above them cracked. Cain looked up. Raska. She turned. A huge section of rock was falling directly toward her. Cain sprinted. He reached Raska just as the rocks crashed down. The impact threw them both into a narrow gap beneath the cliff. Dust filled the air. Raska coughed. Cain. I'm here. She tried to stand but winced. Her leg was trapped beneath a stone. Cain grabbed the rock and pushed. It barely moved. Leave me, Raska said. Cain ignored her. You're not dying here. You can't lift it. Then I'll find another way. He searched the ground and found a broken wooden spear. Using it as a lever, he pushed the stone upward. Nothing. He pushed harder. The spear cracked. Raska stared at him. You are wasting your strength. Cain gritted his teeth. Maybe. He tried again. This time the rock shifted. Raska pulled her leg free. They crawled out of the gap just as another section of the wall collapsed. Around them, the battle was becoming desperate. The human archers on the cliffs were being forced downward. The orc warriors were surrounded. Cain looked toward the canyon entrance. Varek stood there calmly, watching the chaos. He had expected everything. Cain realized they couldn't win by continuing the battle. Raska. She turned. We need to change the plan. How? Get your warriors toward the western cliff. Raska understood immediately. The narrow passage? Yes. They began shouting orders. Human fighters followed the orcs toward the western side of the canyon. The black iron soldiers pursued them. But Cain had noticed something. The enemy's heavy armor made them slow. The western passage was too narrow for them to move efficiently. Cain climbed onto a rock. Now. Raska gave the signal. Orc warriors pushed against the weakened cliff supports they had prepared earlier. The entire slope shifted. A massive wave of dirt and rocks crashed down between the humans and the enemy. The black iron soldiers were separated. Cain's people escaped through the narrow passage. But Varek remained on the other side. He stared directly at Cain. Their eyes met. Varek smiled. You think you've won? Cain raised his rifle. This battle isn't over. Varek turned away. Then the ground beneath Cain suddenly collapsed. He fell into a deep ravine. Cain! Raska rushed forward. Cain disappeared beneath the rocks. For several seconds, there was no movement. Raska froze. Then she dropped her weapon. She climbed down the unstable slope without hesitation. Her warriors shouted for her to stop. She ignored them. She dug through the rocks with her bare hands. One stone. Then another. Her fingers began bleeding. Finally, she heard a faint cough. Cain. Still alive. Raska pulled away the last stone. Cain lay beneath it, badly injured but conscious. She reached down. Take my hand. Cain grabbed it. Raska pulled with all her strength. The moment he was free, Cain looked at her. You came back. Raska frowned. Of course. You could have escaped. She shook her head. You gave me water when I was your enemy. She helped him stand. I won't abandon you now that you're my ally. Cain looked toward the canyon. Behind them, humans and orcs were retreating together. The battle had been a disaster, but something important had happened. They had trusted one another when everything was falling apart. And that trust had saved them. But Varek had escaped. Worse, Cain had discovered something inside the enemy camp before the retreat, a strange map showing every water source in the region. The Black Iron Army wasn't simply conquering land. They were taking control of the water. And if they succeeded, every human and orc settlement in the valley would eventually be forced to surrender. The real war had only begun. The survivors returned to the mountain settlement before sunrise. Nobody celebrated. The battle at Red Canyon had cost them many fighters, and the wounded filled every available shelter. Human hunters sat beside orc warriors, sharing bandages and water. The old divisions had not disappeared completely, but something had changed. They had fought together. And they had survived together. Cain sat beside the fire with his injured arm wrapped tightly against his chest. Across from him, Raska studied the strange map they had recovered from the Black Iron camp. Every river was marked. Every spring. Every underground water source. Red crosses had been drawn over each location. Tomas stared at the map. They're taking the water. Raska nodded. That is how they defeat us. Kane traced the markings with his finger. They don't need to destroy every settlement. He pointed toward the largest river. They only need to control this. If they control the river, Raska said, every community south of the mountains will eventually surrender. The room became silent. Durgan slammed his fist onto the table. Then we attack them again. Kane shook his head. Not yet. Durgan growled. What else can we do? Kane looked at the map. Their main fortress. Everyone turned toward him. Raska's eyes narrowed. You want to attack the fortress? Kane nodded. The fortress controls the river gates. If we destroy the machinery, they lose control of the water. Tomas looked worried. And how many soldiers guard it? Raska answered. Hundreds. Then we need to make them believe we're attacking somewhere else. Kane pointed toward the eastern ridge. We create a false attack there. The humans would make noise, fires, and movement to convince Varek that a large force was approaching from the east. Meanwhile, a smaller group would enter the fortress through an old mining tunnel. Raska immediately volunteered. So do I, Kane said. Raska frowned. You are injured. So are you. That isn't an answer. Kane smiled slightly. Neither is yours. For the first time since the battle, Raska smiled. They selected 8 orc warriors and 6 human scouts. Before leaving, Kane gathered everyone around the settlement fire. If we fail, the fortress remains. Raska looked at the humans. If we succeed, the valley remains free. A young human boy stepped forward. He was carrying a small wooden cup. He walked toward an orc warrior and held it out. Take some water. The orc stared at the boy. Then he accepted the cup. That simple moment reminded everyone why they were fighting. Not for revenge. Not for territory. For a future where children did not have to inherit their parents' hatred. That night, the strike team moved toward the fortress. The old mining tunnel was narrow and almost completely buried. Kane crawled through first, followed by Raska. After nearly an hour, they reached the end. A small opening overlooked the fortress interior. Black-armored soldiers marched below. Huge machines pumped water from the river into massive stone reservoirs. Kane whispered. There. Raska studied the machinery. How do we destroy it? Kane pointed toward a large pressure chamber. We don't need to destroy everything. He explained that if they damaged the pressure chamber, the entire system would collapse. But before they could move, footsteps echoed behind them. They froze. A voice spoke from the darkness. You should have stayed in the canyon. Kane turned. Varek stood behind them. His black armor reflected the torchlight. Soldiers surrounded the tunnel. Raska raised her axe. Kane raised his rifle. Varek smiled. You humans and orcs finally united. He shook his head. Too late. Kane stared at him. You caused the war between us. Varek's smile disappeared. I didn't cause it. I simply understood it. He revealed that his commanders had secretly supplied weapons to both sides for years, ensuring the humans and orcs remained divided. While you fought each other, Varek said, we prepared. Raska's grip tightened around her axe. Kane looked at the water machinery. Then at the soldiers. They were surrounded. But Kane noticed something Varek had overlooked. A small valve beneath the pressure chamber was already leaking. If they could reach it, the entire fortress could be disabled. Kane quietly looked at Raska. She understood. Without warning, she charged. The tunnel exploded into chaos. Cain fired toward the lights, plunging the fortress into darkness. Raska fought through the soldiers. Cain sprinted toward the machinery. He reached the valve. It was heavily locked. He pulled his knife. Behind him, Raska shouted. Cain! He turned. A soldier was raising a weapon behind her. Cain threw his knife. The soldier fell. Raska reached the pressure chamber. Do it! Cain drove the knife into the valve mechanism. A tremendous roar filled the fortress. Water erupted from the damaged machinery. Pipes burst. Reservoir walls cracked. The entire fortress began shaking. Varek stared in disbelief. You fools! Cain grabbed Raska's arm. Run! They raced through the collapsing fortress as water flooded the halls. Behind them, the machines exploded one after another. The river gates opened. Water rushed back into the valley. But Varek escaped through a hidden passage. Cain and Raska emerged onto the mountainside, soaked and exhausted. Below them, the river was flowing freely again. For the first time in generations, human and orc lands would share the same water. Raska looked at Cain. You gave us water once. Cain looked toward the river. This time, we gave it back to everyone. Neither realized that the destruction of the fortress had done more than save the valley. It had destroyed the foundation of the old war. Now the final choice remained. Would humans and orcs return to their old hatred? Or would they finally build something new? Morning came quietly to the valley. For the first time in weeks, there were no horns warning of an attack. No distant explosions echoed from the mountains. No scouts raced into the settlement shouting that the Black Iron Army was approaching. Only the sound of flowing water could be heard. The river had returned. It moved through the valley once again, filling the dry channels and feeding the fields that had nearly turned to dust. Cain stood on a hill overlooking the settlement. Beside him stood Raska. Below them, humans and orcs worked together to repair the damaged homes. Orc warriors carried heavy stones while human carpenters rebuilt wooden walls. Children from both communities carried buckets of water from the river. It was a sight neither Cain nor Raska had ever imagined possible. But the war was not completely over. Varek had escaped. Some of his soldiers had survived as well. Everyone knew they could return. Still, something fundamental had changed. The old hatred had lost its power. Cain walked toward the center of the settlement. An old wooden table had been placed beside the river. On it sat his battered canteen. The same canteen he had carried across the desert. The same canteen that had held the water he gave to Raska when she was dying. Cain picked it up. Raska stood beside him. You kept it, she said. Cain nodded. You returned it. Raska smiled. I thought you should have something to remember. Cain looked at the canteen. I don't think I'll ever forget. People began gathering around them. Humans stood on one side. Orcs stood on the other. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Cain walked to the river. He filled his canteen with fresh water. Instead of drinking it, he handed it to Raska. She looked at him. Then she drank. When she finished, she passed it to an orc warrior. He drank and passed it to a human hunter. Soon the canteen traveled from person to person. Human. Orc. Human. Orc. Nobody stopped to ask who deserved the water. They simply shared it. Tomas watched from the crowd. He had once been one of the strongest voices against trusting the orcs. Now he stepped forward. He looked at Raska. I was wrong. Raska studied him. Tomas extended his hand. Raska accepted it. Around them, people began doing the same. The first agreement between the two peoples was simple. No human would attack an orc settlement. No orc would attack a human settlement. The river would belong to everyone. If danger came, they would stand together. But the greatest change happened among the children. Human children who had once been warned never to approach orcs began playing beside them. Orc children who had been taught that humans were weak discovered that humans could be brave. They played beside the river, racing each other between the trees. Cain watched them and smiled. Raska stood beside him. "Do you think it will last?" she asked. Cain considered the question. "No." Raska looked surprised. Cain continued. "Peace doesn't last because people make one promise." He looked at the children. "It lasts because every generation chooses it again." Raska nodded. Then she looked toward the mountains. "And if Varek returns?" Cain looked at the rifle hanging from his shoulder. "Then we'll face him together." Months passed. The valley changed. Human farmers taught orcs how to repair irrigation channels. Orc hunters taught humans how to track animals through the mountains. They traded food, tools, horses, and stories. The old borders slowly disappeared. Children grew up hearing a different story than their parents had heard. They no longer heard that orcs and humans were born enemies. They heard about Cain. They heard about Raska. And they heard about the canteen. Years later, travelers would visit the valley and ask why humans and orcs lived together. The elders would always tell them the same story. They would point toward an old canteen hanging inside the meeting hall. And they would say, "Once, an Apache warrior found 3 dying orcs in the desert. He had enough water to save himself. But he gave it to them instead." That simple choice changed everything. It began with thirst. It continued with trust. And eventually, it became peace. Cain never considered himself a hero. Raska never considered herself a legend. They had simply made a choice when hatred would have been easier. And because of that choice, 2 peoples who had spent generations fighting each other finally discovered something more powerful than victory. They discovered that an enemy could become an ally. An ally could become a friend. And sometimes, all it took to change the world was one person willing to offer water instead of a weapon.